The iron seal of Caruth had not woken for 400 years, and I had long since stopped believing it ever would. It sat where it had always sat, at the foot of my hall, a slab of black iron the height of a man's chest, cut with the old marks no living smith could read, cold to the touch in every season. My father had pressed his hand to it the day they crowned him and felt nothing. His father before him, nothing. Back and back through the gray line of Caruth's kings, every one of us had laid a palm to that dead iron on the day we took the hold, and every one of us had felt the same dead cold, and every one of us had turned away and ruled without the thing our blood was supposed to wake. They said the seal answered only true blood, the true blood of the North, the drowned line, the old kingdom that lay under my hold like a corpse under a cairn, sunk when the great flood took the low country 4 centuries gone. When that kingdom drowned, its heirs drowned with it, and the seal that had known their hands went cold and stayed cold, and the wolf lords of Caruth built their grim hold of iron and slag over the bones of it and called themselves kings for want of anyone truer. I was the latest of them, Tauren of Caruth, a hard name for a hard hold, and I had never once pretended the iron might wake for me. A man does not grieve a thing he never had. I ruled the slag terraces and the smelt yards. I kept the pack fed and the borders shut. And when high-born lunas came in silver to test their hands on the seal, as they did, hopeful, believing their noble blood might be the blood the iron missed, I let them try, and I watched them fail, and I felt nothing but the old flat cold of a man who has stopped expecting anything from the dark. So it was not hope that made me look at the labor train. It was only the work. The Undercroft had flooded again. The drowned kingdom below us was always trying to come back up, black water rising through the old stone, filling the low vaults where we stored the winter grain, and every few years I had to send men down to bale and shore and clear before the whole Undercroft gave way. It was foul work and cold work and work that killed men slow, and so we did not send our own to it. We bought it done. War slaves, mostly, the leavings of the border fights, sold cheap by the packs that took them, cheaper still by the time they reached a hold as grim as mine. A labor master brought a train of them up the slag road in the gray light, chained wrist to wrist, and I came down to the yard to count them the way a man counts any tool he has paid for. I want to be honest about the man I was because the story does not make sense unless you see him. I did not look at those slaves as people. I had trained myself out of it, the way you train yourself out of anything that costs you. I looked at them as arms and backs, how many, how strong, how long they would last in the black water below. I walked the line counting, and I had counted nearly to the end before I stopped. There was one at the back who was looking at me. That was all it was at first. A slave was not supposed to look at a king. They kept their eyes down, the labor masters beat it into them and the world beat it in deeper, and every other wretch in that chain line had their gaze on the mud where it belonged. This one did not. She stood at the end of the train, a woman, though it took a second look to be sure of it, so lean and scarred and closed over was she, and she was watching me the way a soldier watches a door, not defiant. Defiance I would have understood. Defiance is a thing you break. This was something colder and more patient. It was the look of someone who had decided, a long time ago, that she would see everything and let nothing see her, and who had held to that decision through more than I could guess. She had a brand on her cheek, old and silvered. Scars on her forearms of the kind you get from blades, not from labor. The flat, clean lines of a life spent closer to war than to any grain vault. And when my eye caught hers, she did not drop it and she did not hold it to challenge me. She simply let it go, unhurried, and looked back at the mud as if she had merely finished taking my measure and found nothing in me worth the trouble of a fight. I moved on. I finished the count. I told the labor master which vaults to flood clear first, and I went back up to my hall, and I did not think of her again that day, or I told myself I did not. But my wolf had gone quiet in a way it did not usually go quiet, and I noticed that, the way you notice a sound stopping, the smell-trough of my own instincts, always running under everything, had dropped to a listening hush when I passed the end of that line. I put it down to the strangeness of a slave who would not lower her eyes. A man can explain a great deal to himself when he does not want to look at the truth of it. They put her in the undercroft with the rest, in the black water, clearing the drowned vaults of the drowned kingdom. And that, I thought, was the whole of it. It was not the whole of it. The labor master came to me 3 days on, uneasy, turning his cap in his hands the way men do when they have a thing to say that they think will anger me. The work was going well enough, he said. The vaults were clearing. But there was the scarred woman, the watcher, and she was, he said, a difficulty. Not for laziness. She outworked men twice her size, hauled and shored without complaint, never spoke a word that anyone had heard. The difficulty was the other slaves. They had begun to, he searched for the word, to arrange themselves around her, to carry the heavy stone to where she stood, to wait, without seeming to wait, for the small movements of her hand that told them where to brace and where to pull. She gave no orders. She could not. She never spoke. And yet the whole drowned undercroft had begun, quietly, to move to the rhythm of a slave who would not lower her eyes. They follow her, the labor master said, baffled, and I cannot find the reason. She does nothing. She says nothing. And they follow her like she was born to it. Like she was born to it. The word sat in me strangely, though I could not have said why. I told him to work her as hard as the rest and to beat the arrangement out of the others if it slowed the clearing, and he went away still turning his cap, and I sat in my cold hall in front of my cold iron seal, and found that I was thinking about a scarred woman in the black water below my feet, moving a whole train of broken men by the small motions of her hand. I told myself it was a commander's interest. I had led men in the border fights. I knew the thing she had, that rare gravity that makes others fall into your orbit without a word spoken, and it is a useful thing to note in a tool. That was all. A useful tool, worth watching so I might use it better. I have since learned to be suspicious of the reasons I give myself when they arrive so quickly and fit so neatly. I went down to the undercroft. I did not admit to myself why. I told my steward I meant to see the clearing for myself, and perhaps that was even partly true, and I went down the wet black stairs into the drowned kingdom under my hold with a torch and 2 of my own men, into the cold reek of water that had been standing 400 years. It is a strange thing to walk in a drowned kingdom. The vaults down there are not Caruth's vaults. We only stored our grain in them. They are older, the low halls of the sunk northern line, their stone finer than any my smiths could cut, their carvings worn soft by centuries of black water but still in places legible. Faces, beasts, the old marks, the same dead marks that scarred my iron seal above. I had been down before to inspect the clearing, and I had felt nothing but the cold and the reek. I felt more than that now, though I could not have named it, a kind of pressure, a sense of the old stone listening that I put down to the closeness of the air. The slaves were working a far vault, chest deep in the black water, passing fallen stone hand to hand toward the stairs. And she was among them, and I saw at once what the labor master had meant. She said nothing. She gave no sign that any man could have called an order, but the work moved around her like water around a stone in a stream. She was the fixed point the whole labor found its shape against, and she did it without seeming to know she did it, which is the only way that gravity is ever real. She saw me on the stair. Of course she did. She saw everything. And this time, in the torchlight, in the drowned hall of the kingdom, her scars and her stillness had come from, though I did not yet know it, she held my eyes a beat longer than she had in the yard. Not defiance. A question. As if she were trying to place me. As if some old buried thing in her had stirred at the sight of a wolf king standing on the stairs of a drowned hall, and she did not yet know why either. Then she looked away, back to the water, back to the work, and the moment closed. I should have gone back up. I had seen what I came to see. Instead, I stood on that wet stair longer than I meant to, watching a scarred slave move a drowned kingdom's worth of broken men by the small motions of her hand. And I felt, for the first time in more years than I would say aloud, that the flat gray cold I had built my whole rule on had a crack in it somewhere, and that cold air was coming through. The waking, when it began, did not begin as waking. It began as a thing I could dismiss. It was some days later. The vaults were clearing faster than any train before them, and I had ordered the cleared stone brought up and stacked in the hall, good old northern stone, too fine to waste, and so the slaves came up out of the black water in chains, carrying the drowned kingdom's ruin into my hall, past my dead iron seal, load after load. I was on my seat above, half attending to a steward's account of the grain, and half, I will be honest, watching for one scarred figure in the chained line. She came up with a stone in her arms, water still black on her from the vault, and her path took her within a few strides of the seal. And the iron warmed. I felt it before I understood it. I had sat above that dead slab my whole life. I knew its cold the way I knew my own name, the flat, lifeless chill it gave off in every season. And as she passed it, chained, unknowing, carrying a drowned kingdom's stone, the cold of it changed. Only for a breath, only by a degree. A warmth came off the iron like the warmth off a hearth an hour dead, the faintest ghost of heat where 400 years had held nothing but cold, and it lasted exactly as long as she was near it and no longer. I stood up so fast my steward startled and dropped his account. She was already past, already at the far end of the hall, stacking her stone, unaware, unseeing, one more scarred slave among a chained train. The iron was cold again, flat and gray and dead as it had been my whole life, as it had been my father's whole life, as it had been for 4 centuries under the wolf lords of Caruth. I stood there with my heart going hard and told myself I had imagined it. The torches, a draft. A man sees what he wishes to see, and I had been watching that woman for days with an interest I would not name. Of course I had felt a warmth that was not there. I sat back down. I waved my steward on. I did not have him bring her back, and I did not lay my own hand on the iron to test it because, and this is the truth, the shameful, useful truth of the man I was, I did not want it to be real. Do you see it? For 400 years my line had wanted that iron to wake, and it never had. I had made my peace with the dead cold of it. I had built a whole hard king out of expecting nothing. And now, in a single breath, a scarred slave carrying drowned stone had passed it, and it had warmed, and every certainty I had rested my rule on stood suddenly on cracking ice. It is easier than you would think to choose not to know a thing, when knowing it will break you open. So I chose not to know it. For 3 more days I chose not to know it. I had her worked in the far vaults, away from the hall, away from the seal, and I told myself I did it for the clearing, and not because I could not bear the iron to warm again where anyone might see. The bond does not care what a man chooses. I understand that now. It is not a thing you feel when you decide to. It is a thing that decides for you, and mine had already decided, down there on the wet black stair, watching a woman the world had branded and chained move a drowned kingdom by the motions of her hand. I only had not admitted it. My wolf had gone quiet around her, not from indifference but from the oldest recognition. There is the stillness of a thing that is found, after a long cold hunt, the one it did not know it was hunting for. I had mistaken the hush of arrival for the hush of nothing. I had that backward, as I had a great deal backward, in the gray cold days before the iron woke. On the 4th day, the labor master came to me again, and this time his face was not baffled but afraid. There had been a collapse in the far vault. The old drowned stone, 4 centuries soft with water, had given at last where they were clearing it, and a fall of it had come down, and a slave was pinned in the rising black water with the roof coming after. The others could not reach him. The water was rising. And the scarred woman, the watcher, the one they followed, had gone into the fall after him, into the very place the roof was giving, and would not come out. And the labor master had come to me because he did not know whether to order his men in after her or to seal the vault and cut his losses before the whole drowned hall came down on all of them. I was on my feet and down the black stairs before he finished. I will not pretend I understood, even then, all of what moved me. I told myself a king does not waste a train of paid-for slaves in a collapse he might prevent. But my feet were already carrying me down into the reek and the cold, faster than any account of grain could explain, toward a scarred woman I had spent 4 days pretending not to think about, and my wolf was up and roaring in a way it had not roared since the border fights. Not the roar of a king protecting his property, but something far older and far more frightened. The roar of a creature that has just understood it might lose the one thing it did not know it could not lose. The far vault was chaos when I reached it, torchlight and black water and the groan of failing stone. The slaves had drawn back to the stair, chained and terrified, and the labor master's men stood at the edge of the fall not daring to go in. And in the middle of it, waist-deep in rising black water, under a roof that was letting go in slabs, the scarred woman had her arms around a pinned man and was hauling against stone that should have taken 3 men to shift, her scarred face set, her whole lean body a single line of refusal. And she was not going to leave him. I saw that in one look. She was going to stay in that collapsing drowned hall and drown with a stranger before she would leave him to drown alone. I went in. I did not order it, there was no time for orders. I went into the black water and the falling stone myself, a king up to his chest in the ruin of a drowned kingdom, and I put my hands to the stone beside hers and we hauled together, and I felt her startle at the sight of me there at the king of Caruth in the water at her side, and then I felt her decide fast as she decided everything, that I was another pair of hands and the man's life was worth taking them. We hauled. The stone gave. The pinned man came free into the black water gasping, and the others found their courage seeing their king in the wet, and hands reached from the stair to drag him clear. And the roof came down. Not all of it, but a slab of the old drowned stone let go above us as the last man cleared, and there was no time to reach the stair, and I did the only thing there was to do. I put myself over her, a wolf king's body between a scarred slave and a falling kingdom, and I braced for the stone. It did not fall on us. It caught, groaning, on the fallen stone we had just cleared and hung there and held. We had a breath, one breath to move before it let go the rest of the way. And in that breath, pressed together in the black water under a hanging slab of the drowned north, her scarred hand came up against the old worn stone of the vault wall to push us both toward the stair, her bare palm flat against a carved face of the old northern line, one of the soft-worn faces cut 400 years gone by the kingdom that lay drowned beneath my hold. The stone lit under her hand. Gold, a line of gold running out from her palm through the old carved marks, racing along the drowned wall, following the cut channels of a script no living smith could read, waking as it went 400 years of dead stone kindling to warm gold at the touch of one scarred slave's hand, lighting the black water, lighting the falling vault, lighting her astonished face and mine. I had felt the iron seal warm at a distance. I had chosen not to know it. There was no choosing not to know this. The drowned kingdom was answering her. The old stone knew her hand the way a lock knows the one key cut to fit it, and it had waited 400 years in the black water to feel that hand again, and now it had, and it was singing gold through all its drowned halls at once. She stared at her own palm as if it belonged to a stranger. She did not understand it. I saw that plainly. Whatever she was, she did not yet know it, had been branded and chained and worked in the dark her whole life with no notion of the blood in her hand. And I, the hard gray king who had made his peace with a dead seal, who had trained himself to expect nothing, who had chosen for 4 days not to know. I looked at the gold running out from a scarred slave's palm through the bones of the drowned kingdom, and I understood, all at once and far too late to pretend otherwise, exactly what had come up my slag road chained in a labor train. The hanging slab groaned. Our breath was gone. "Move," I said, and I got her to the stair. I got her to the stair, and the drowned vault came down behind us. The whole far hall let go 400 years of soft black stone folding into the rising water with a roar that shook the undercroft to its roots, and we came up out of it into the torchlight of the lower stair, soaked and streaming, the slaves scattering back, the labor master's men hauling us clear. The pinned man lived. Every man on that train lived. which was more than any collapse in my memory had ever given back. And in the confusion of it, in the shouting and the water and the counting of the living, I do not think one soul saw what I had seen. I saw it. I could not stop seeing it. Her palm, and the gold running out from it through the drowned stone, waking a kingdom that had been dead since before my line was named. She stood on the stair, dripping, that scarred face closed over again the way it always closed, and she was looking at her own hand, turning it in the torchlight. A slave does not look at her own hand as though it might belong to someone else. But she did, and I understood that whatever the stone had woken, she had felt it wake, and she was as far from understanding it as I had pretended to be for 4 cold days. "You," I said, my voice came out rougher than I meant, "with me." The labor master started forward. A slave did not go anywhere but where he sent her, and I put a look on him that stopped him where he stood. "The king's business," I said, and it was the truth, though I did not yet know how much of one. I took her up out of the drowned kingdom myself, the two of us dripping black water up the wet stairs into my hall, and behind us the undercroft settled and groaned and went quiet, its long secret carried up in the palm of a scarred woman who did not know she held it. My hall was empty at that hour but for the guards at the doors, and I sent even those out. I did not want witnesses to what I meant to do, because if I was wrong, if the drowned vault had been some trick of failing stone and torchlight, some last flaring of a dying hall, then I did not want the whole of Caruth to see its king make a fool of himself before a dead slab of iron with a slave. And if I was right, I wanted even less for them to see it. Not yet, not before I understood it. The iron seal sat where it had always sat, black and cold at the foot of my hall. 400 years of my line had laid a hand to it and felt nothing. I had felt it warm when she passed, a breath of heat I had chosen not to believe. Now I stood before it with her at my side, both of us streaming drowned water onto the stone, and I found that my own certainty had deserted me. It is one thing to see a wall light in the chaos of a collapse. It is another to stand in your own cold hall and ask a scarred stranger to touch the relic your whole gray bloodline had failed. She was watching me. Of course she was. She had watched me from the first, and she watched me now, a soaked king standing uncertain before a slab of iron, and a slave who had learned long ago to read a man's next move in the set of his shoulders. I think she knew what I meant to ask before I asked it. I think she had already put it together, in that fast, cold way of hers, from the gold in the drowned vault, and the way I had hauled her up the stairs alone. "Do you know what this is?" I said, not quite a question. She looked at the iron, and then she spoke, the first words I ever heard from her, low and rough with disuse, the voice of a woman who had learned that speaking cost more than silence saved. "A dead thing," she said, "like the rest of this hold." It should have angered me, a slave calling my hall's oldest relic a dead thing. It did not. It was only true. "It has been dead 400 years," I said. "It is said to answer only true blood, the old blood of the north, the kingdom that lies drowned under this floor. Every king of my line has pressed his hand to it and felt nothing. I felt nothing. My father felt nothing." I looked at her scarred hand, still black with the water of the drowned hall. "The stone below knew your palm. I saw it." Something moved in her face then, the first crack I ever saw in that closed-over stillness. Fear, I thought at first. Then I understood it was something worse than fear and older. It was the look of a person who has spent a lifetime being no one, being a tool, being a back and a pair of arms in the black water, and who is being told, by a king, in an empty hall that she might be something the world would have to look at. For a soul that has survived by being unseen, there is no terror like being seen. "I am a slave," she said, and her voice was flat and hard. "I was a slave before Caruth bought me, and a soldier before I was a slave, and a border child before that, sold off a burned holding I do not remember. I have no blood but the kind that spills." She looked at the iron with something close to contempt. "Whatever you saw in that vault, it was the stone dying, not me living. Do not put a crown on a thing you want to be true, King of Caruth. I have watched better men than you break themselves that way. I have watched better men than you break themselves that way. I have thought about that line many times since. It was the truest window she ever gave me in those early days into the whole shape of her life, that she had learned to distrust hope the way I had learned to expect nothing, that we had come to the same cold country by different roads, and that she trusted a wanting less than she trusted a blow, because a blow at least never pretended to be kindness. "Then prove me a fool," I said. "Touch it. If it stays cold, I will know I saw a dying stone, and I will send you back to the vaults, and we will neither of us speak of it again. But if you will not touch it," and here I stopped because I had heard what I was about to say and it shamed me. I had been about to say, "If you will not touch it, I will make you." The old king, the gray hard king, reaching as he always reached for the lever of force. A slave does not refuse, a slave is made. I did not say it. I stood in my empty hall with the drowned water running off us both, and I made myself say the thing that came harder to me than any blow. "But if you will not touch it," I said, "then you will not, and I will send you back to the vaults all the same, and I will not lay a hand on you to force it. The choosing is yours." She stared at me. I do not think anyone had offered her a choosing in a very long time. I do not think she had known a king could. For a long moment she did not move. The torches guttered. The iron sat black and cold between us. And then slowly, watching me the whole way, as if she still more than half expected the offer to be a trick and the blow to come the instant she reached, she lifted her scarred hand, and she pressed her palm flat to the dead iron seal of Caruth. The hall filled with gold. It did not warm. It did not kindle slowly. It woke, the whole black slab blazing gold from her palm outward in a single breath, the dead marks that no living smith could read flaring to life all at once, running light up the iron and out along the floor, along the old cut channels I had never even known were channels, racing down through the stone toward the drowned kingdom below, as if the seal above and the halls beneath were one thing at last, remembering it was one thing. The light of it filled my hall to the rafters. It lit her scarred and astonished face. It lit 400 years of my gray line's failure and burned straight through it. She tried to pull her hand back. The gold held it there, not cruelly, but the way a lock holds the key that fits it, unwilling after 4 centuries to let go the one hand it had waited for. And as the light ran up her arm, I saw them, the marks surfacing on her scarred skin. Not brands, not the blade cuts of her soldiering. Under all of it, rising to the gold like a watermark held to a flame, the old sigil lines of the drowned northern line, worked into her very blood, invisible her whole life and blazing now. The mark of the kingdom that had gone under the water 400 years gone, alive again in the skin of a slave who had been told she was no one. I went to my knees. I did not decide to. A king of Caruth does not kneel. We had built 4 centuries of hard rule on kneeling to nothing, on ruling a drowned kingdom's bones, because there was no truer blood left to rule it. And I went down onto the stone of my own hall before a scarred slave with the light of the true north running gold up her arm, because there are moments when the body knows a truth before the mind will let it be spoken. And my body had known since the wet black stare what my mind had spent 4 days refusing. "Get up," she said, sharp, frightened. "Get up, you cannot." And then the gold reached the mark at her throat, the last and deepest of them, and it surfaced there too, and she felt it, and her hand flew to her own neck, and she went utterly still. She knew then. Not the whole of it, not the history, not the drowned line, not the 400 years. But she knew the thing under the thing, that the story she had told herself her whole life, the story of a border child sold off a burned holding, a nothing, a tool, a back in the black water, that story was not the true one. That there had been a truer one all along, buried under the brand and the scars, and the iron had just spoken it aloud in gold in front of a kneeling king. I have seen strong people meet grief, and I have seen them meet fear. I had never, until that moment, seen anyone meet the ruin of the whole story they had survived by. She stood in the gold light with her hand at her marked throat and her scarred face open at last, wide open. And what was in it was not joy, that would come later, harder one, but a kind of terrible vertigo, the ground of a whole life tilting under her. Everything she had used to keep herself alive, every wall of "I am no one, I expect nothing. I trust a blow over a kindness. Had just been told by 400 years of drowned stone that it was built on a lie. I got up off my knees slowly so as not to fright her worse, and I did not reach for her, though every instinct in me wanted to. My wolf was up and roaring the old recognition. The hush of arrival I had mistaken for the hush of nothing, and it wanted to close the distance and cover her and never let the world touch her again. I held it. She had been touched enough by force in her life. If she came, she would come by her own choosing, or she would not come, and I would live with it. I do not know what this is, I said low. I know only what I see. The seal answers true blood, the true blood of the North, and it has answered you as it has answered no hand in 400 years. Whatever they made you carry, the brand, the chains, the story of a nothing off a burned holding, it was never the truth of you. The iron does not lie. It cannot be flattered and it cannot be forced. It knows what it knows. I looked at the mark risen gold at her throat. You are the blood this hold was built over. The drowned line did not drown out. It went to ground and it went into you, and it has just come up out of the black water into my hall. She said nothing for a long time. The gold slowly faded, sinking back into the iron, back under her skin, the marks going quiet again beneath the scars, until she stood once more looking like any scarred and branded slave, save that neither of us would ever be able to unsee what the light had shown. When she finally spoke, her voice was not the flat, hard voice of before. It was smaller and it shook, and it was the most honest thing she had yet given me. If this is true, she said, then everything that was done to me was done to a queen's blood, and the world let it happen and called it nothing. She looked at her scarred hands. I do not know what to do with that. I do not know if I want it. It would have been easier to be no one. I know, I said, and I did. Had I not built my whole gray rule on wanting nothing because wanting had a cost I had decided not to pay, we were two people who had survived by expecting the dark, and the gold had just called both our bluffs. You do not have to know tonight. You do not have to want it tonight. But I will not send you back to the vaults, and I will not let another hand in this hold lay a chain on you again, whatever you decide of the rest. It was the wrong thing and the right thing at once. The wrong thing, because a king cannot simply unmake a slave with a sentence. There were laws. There were the packs that had sold her. There was a whole court above us that would have a great deal to say about the king of Caruth taking a branded war slave up out of the vaults and standing bareheaded before her in an empty hall. The right thing, because it was true, and because she needed one true thing said to her that night that asked nothing back. She heard it. I saw her hear it. And she did not thank me. She was far too scarred for thanks, and I would not have known what to do with them, but something in the set of her shoulders eased a fraction, the smallest loosening of a guard held so long it had grown into the bone. It was not trust. Trust was a country we were both a long way from, but it was the first step onto the road that led there. I had her given a room. Not a cell, not the vault quarters, a room, in the hold proper, with a door that locked from the inside, so that for the first night in longer than she could likely remember she could sleep behind a door no one else could open. I set my own most trusted man at the passage end, not to guard her in but to guard the hold's cruelty out, and I told him plainly that any hand raised against her was a hand raised against the king. And then I went to my own cold chamber and did not sleep at all, because the whole shape of my rule, my line, my gray certain expecting nothing self, had come apart in an evening, and I lay in the dark and felt the crack in the cold widen into a country I did not have a map for. The court found out. Of course the court found out. A thing like that cannot be kept, not with the drowned Undercroft still glowing faintly gold for 2 days after, not with the king's own trusted man set to guard a slave's door. By the 3rd day it was through the whole hold and climbing, and by the 4th it had reached the highborn, the wolf lords and the silver lunas, the very people who had come to Caruth over the years to press their own noble hands to the dead iron and feel nothing, and who now heard that the seal their blood could not wake had blazed to gold under the palm of a branded war slave up from the vaults. They did not take it well. I had known they would not. There is nothing a proud blood hates like the proof that its pride was empty, and every highborn hand that had ever failed my iron seal had just been told, in effect, that it had failed because it was not true enough, and that the true blood had been chained in the black water all along while they wore their silver in the hall above. They came to me in a body. They demanded she be tested again, before witnesses, so the trick could be exposed. They demanded to know what I meant to do, for the law was the law, and a slave was a slave, and the packs that had sold her had rights in her that a king could not simply wave away with a sentence in an empty hall. And beneath all of it, though none of them said it plainly, they demanded that I make the gold be a lie, because if it was true then the whole grey order of Caruth, 400 years of wolf lords ruling a drowned kingdom's bones for want of anyone truer, had just been shown its own ending, and they were not ready to meet it. I stood before them in my hall, at the foot of the iron seal that had woken for a slave and never for them, and I understood that the choosing I had left to her was about to be taken out of both our hands. The court would have its test. It would have it publicly, before the whole assembled highborn of Caruth, so that whatever the iron did could be seen and argued, and either buried or believed by every proud blood in the hold. And she would have to stand before all of them, the branded, the chained, the woman who had survived a lifetime by being no one, and press her scarred palm to the iron with the entire court that had owned her kind watching to see her fail. I did not know, standing there, whether she would do it. I did not know whether the woman who had told me it would have been easier to be no one would walk into that hall and let 400 years of highborn scorn watch her either fail or become a queen. I only knew that I had promised her a choosing, and that the court was about to try to take it, and that whatever else I did I would not let them make her do it by force, not even now, not even with my whole grey order riding on the answer. I went to her room to ask her, not to command her, to ask. I went to her room to ask her, and I found her already dressed to be seen. Not in silver, not in the trappings the court would have put on a thing it wanted to parade. She had been given plain clothes, good ones, clean. A slave's brand still silver on her cheek above the collar of them, and she had bound back her hair and set her scarred shoulders, and when I came in she was standing at the window looking down at the slag terraces of the hold that had owned her, and she turned to me with a face I had not seen on her before, still closed, still watchful, but underneath the watching, something had settled that had not been settled the night the iron woke. She had spent 3 days behind a door that locked from the inside, and she had done what she had always done in the black water. She had thought and weighed and found her footing. "They want me in the hall," she said, not a question. She had heard the court through the walls of a hold, she heard everything. "They do," I said. "They want you tested before the whole highborn of Caruth, publicly, so that whatever the iron does can be seen by every proud blood in this hold and either buried or believed." I made myself say the rest of it plain because she had earned plainness. "They want you to fail, most of them. The ones who pressed their own hands to that seal and felt nothing, they need it to be a trick, because if it is true, then the whole grey order they have lived inside is over, and they know it. You will walk into that hall, and every certainty in it will be praying you are a liar." "And you," she said, "what do you need me to be?" It was a fair question and a hard one. I had needed a great many things in my life and gotten used to needing none of them. "I need nothing from you," I said, and found as I said it that it was true. "The iron will do what it does. I cannot make it lie for me, and I cannot make it lie for them. What I came to say is this: the choosing is still yours. If you do not walk into that hall, I will stand between you and the whole court of Caruth, and I will not let them drag you to the iron by force. It will cost me. It may cost me the hold. I do not care. You have been made to do enough things in your life by a hand at your neck. This will not be one of them, whatever it costs me to keep it so." She looked at me a long time. The slaglight came gray through the window, and then she said the thing that told me more than the gold ever had, what blood was truly in her. "You keep offering me a door I can shut," she said. "Every time. The iron, the vaults, now this. You keep telling me I can walk away." She touched the brand on her cheek, old, silvered, the mark of everyone who had ever owned her. No one has offered me a shut door since I was a child on a burned holding, and I have been thinking behind mine these 3 days on why you do it, and I think it is because you know what it is to expect nothing. I saw it the first day in the yard before I knew what you were, a king with the same cold in him I have. You built yours out of a dead seal. I built mine out of a chain, but it is the same cold. It is, I said. Then hear me, she said, and she stepped away from the window, and for the first time since the labor train she stood to her full height without the stoop a slave learns, and it changed her utterly. I will walk into that hall, not because you ask, not because they demand, because I have spent my whole life letting the world tell me I was no one, and being no one kept me alive, and I am done keeping alive that way. If the iron makes me a liar, then I will have found out what I am, and I will go back to the vaults knowing it, and that is still more than I had a week ago. And if the iron makes me true, she stopped. Her scarred hands were steady. If the iron makes me true, then every proud blood in that hall that watched my kind chained and called it nothing is going to have to look at what they let happen, and I am going to make them look. Not for you. For every soul still down in that black water, who was told the same lie I was. I have ruled a hard hold for a hard many years. I have led men in the border fights and buried more of them than I like to count. I had never in my life heard anything I wanted to follow the way I wanted to follow that. Then let us give them their test, I said. The hall of Caruth was full to the walls. Every wolf lord, every silver luna, every proud blood in the hold and half the packs beyond it had come for this, packed shoulder to shoulder down the length of my hall, all of them turned toward the black iron seal at its foot. They had come to see a slave fail. I could feel it coming off them like heat off the smelt yards, the hunger of a proud order to watch the thing that threatened it be exposed and put back down in the dark where it belonged. There is no cruelty like the cruelty of comfortable people defending their comfort, and my hall was thick with it. She walked in alone. I had offered to walk her in. She had refused. If I come in on a king's arm, she said, they will say the king propped me up. I will come in on my own or the iron means nothing. And so she came the length of that packed and hostile hall alone, a branded slave in plain clothes, past 400 years of high-born blood that wanted her broken, and she did not stoop, and she did not hurry, and she did not once drop her eyes. She walked the way she had moved the black water, the fixed point the whole room found its shape against, whether it willed to or not. By the time she reached the iron, the hall had gone quiet without anyone calling for quiet. She did that. She had always done that. They just had not known, until now, what they were feeling when they fell still around her. The eldest of the wolf lords spoke the challenge, a hard old blood who had pressed his own hand to that seal in his youth and felt nothing, and had hated the iron a little ever since for it. He told the hall what the seal was. He told them it answered only the true blood of the North, drowned 4 centuries gone. He told them, with a curl in his voice, that it was claimed a slave had woken it, and that the court had gathered to see this claim proven or exposed. And then he told her to press her hand to the iron, and his voice said plainly that he expected the cold, dead nothing that his own hand had met, and that when it came, he would have her back in the vaults by dusk and this whole unseemly business buried. She looked at him. She looked at the packed hall, the silver and the fur, the proud faces waiting to watch her fail, and she looked last at me, standing at the foot of my own hall, having promised her a shut door and kept it. Then she turned to the iron, and she pressed her scarred palm flat against it, in front of the whole assembled might of Caruth. The hall filled with gold. It went up as it had gone up in the empty hall, but there were witnesses now, 400 souls, to see the dead black slab blaze to life under a slave's hand. The marks no living smith could read, flaring gold all at once, the light racing up the iron and out along the floor down the whole length of the hall, following channels in the stone that none of them had ever known were there, running out under their very feet toward the drowned kingdom below. The gold lit every proud face in that hall. It lit the wolf lord's challenge dying in his throat, and it lit her, the drowned line marks surfacing gold through her scars, up her arm, to the mark at her throat, the sigil of the true north blazing on the skin of a woman they had watched chained and called nothing. I heard the sound the hall made. It was not a cheer. It was the sound 400 proud bloods make when the ground of their whole order gives way at once, a low, involuntary sound, half gasp and half groan, the sound of comfortable people forced to see. The silver lunas who had pressed their own hands to that iron and felt nothing stood white-faced before the proof that they had failed because they were not true, and the true blood had been in the black water beneath their feet the whole time. The wolf lords who had ruled a drowned kingdom's bones for 4 centuries looked on the heir of the kingdom they had built over, alive, marked, blazing gold, and had no words at all. And she did not gloat. I had half feared she would. A lifetime of that scorn would have earned her the right to throw it back. She did something better. She held her palm to the iron until the whole hall had seen, until there was not a soul in it that could pretend it had not, and then she turned from the seal to the packed and stricken court, the gold still bright on her scarred skin, and she spoke into the silence in that low, rough voice, and every proud blood in Caruth leaned to hear a slave. "You called my kind nothing," she said. "You watched us chained and worked in your black water, and you called it the order of things. And the whole time, the blood you knelt your dead seal to was down there in the dark with us, because you could not tell a queen from a tool once you had put a brand on her cheek. She let that land. Nobody moved. I'm not here to take your silver or your holds. I am here so that you have to know what you did, and so that every soul still down in those vaults comes up out of the black water tonight, and no hand in Caruth lays a chain on a border child off a burned holding again, because you can no longer tell yourselves you know which of them is nothing." She looked down the whole length of that hall. "The iron cannot be flattered and it cannot be forced. Neither now can I. There is a thing that happens once in a great while when a truth is spoken plainly enough in a room too full to hide in." The hall bowed, not by command, not all at once and not gladly, but the old wolf lord who had thrown the challenge went down first, stiff and gray and unable to do otherwise before the blazing proof of a blood truer than his own, and where the eldest went the rest could not stay standing, and the silver lunas followed, and the fur followed, until the whole packed court of Caruth had bent its proud head to a branded slave with the true north burning gold up her scarred arm. I did not make them. She did not make them. The iron did, 400 years of it come due all at once. I came to her then, through the bowing hall, and I did the last thing I had left to do. I could have crowned her. The court would have borne it. The iron had already unmade every argument against it. I could have taken a branded war slave and set her at my side and made her Luna of Caruth with a sentence, the way I had first, foolishly, thought to unmake her slavery with a sentence in an empty hall. And a week before, the gray-haired king I had been would have done exactly that, reached, as I always reached, for the lever, and called it generosity. I did not. I stopped before her, in front of the whole kneeling court, and I did not take her hand, though every eye in that hall expected me to, and my wolf howled at me too. I let the space stay between us, and I said low, but plain enough for the front of the hall to hear and carry back. "The iron has said what you are. It does not need me to say more, and I will not stand here and hand you a crown as though it were mine to give. You have had a lifetime of people deciding your worth, and I will not be the last of them, even in kindness." The hall was utterly silent. "I built this hold on expecting nothing, the way you survived it by trusting a blow over a hope. That was the cold in us both. I am done with mine. What I want," and here the hard gray king, who had never in his life said such a thing aloud before 400 souls, said it anyway, "what I want is you beside me, not because the iron woke or the pax owe or the law bends, but because in a drowned vault you would not leave a dying stranger to drown alone, and I have not wanted to be a better man for anyone in a long time until I watched you be one. But that is a door only you can walk through. I have kept it shut so you could choose. It is open now. Walk through it or do not. Either way you are free, and either way no hand in Caruth will chain your kind again." I have replayed the silence that followed more times than I can count. It was the longest of my life. She stood in the gold light with the whole bent court behind her, and the free dark of the vaults below her, and a king before her offering. For once, no lever at all, only an open door and the terror of choosing to walk through it, which for a soul that has survived by expecting nothing is the hardest walk there is. She looked at me a long time. That watching look, the one from the yard, the one that had taken my measure the first day and found nothing worth the trouble of a fight. It had changed. There was still the watching in it, but under the watching at last was the thing that had been growing since the wet black stare, since the shut doors, since a king went to his knees on his own hall floor before a slave. "You keep offering me a door I can shut," she said again, softly, only this time it was not an accusation, it was almost a wonder. "No one ever has, I did not know a person could." Her scarred hand came up, the one the iron knew, and she looked at it, marked gold, a queen's blood in a slave's palm. "I have spent my whole life walking away from every hand that reached for me, because every hand that reached for me wanted to close on something." She looked back up at me. "You are the first that ever reached and left the hand open." And then she took the step, her choosing, her own, in front of the whole world that had owned her, and she closed the space between us that I had left open, and she put her marked hand in mine. Not because the iron woke, not because the law bent, not because a king asked, but because she looked at an open door and for the first time in a lifetime of shut ones, chose to walk through it. The vaults emptied that night. Every soul in the black water came up out of it, unchained, and Caruth learned to be a hold that could no longer tell itself it knew which of its people were nothing. The old wolf lords lived out their days in a kingdom whose whole gray order she had unmade with a palm and a true word, and they never quite met her eye again, which was a fitting weight for them to carry. The packs that had sold her found no court in the north that would honor a claim on the blood the iron had woken. And the drowned kingdom below stayed lit, faintly, gold in its deep halls, no longer a corpse under a cairn, but a thing come up at last into the light in her. She did not become a soft woman. I did not want her soft. I had watched her haul a stranger out of a collapsing vault, and I would not have traded that hardness for any silver luna in the north. She stayed scarred and watchful and slow to trust, and she kept always the habit of reading a door before she walked through it. But she walked through mine. That was the thing. Not once, again and again, each day choosing it fresh, the way you only trust a thing you were never made to. They tell it in Caruth now the way such things get told. How the iron seal that had known no blood in 400 years blazed gold under the palm of a scarred slave, and how the king bent his whole proud court to her, and how the true north came up out of the black water in a woman the world had branded and chained. It is a good telling. It is even mostly true. But it is not the part I keep. The part I keep is smaller, and it is only ours, and I have never told it in any hall. The part I keep is the open hand, the door I left unshut, not knowing if she would walk through it. And the moment, after the gold had faded and the court had gone and the vault stood empty and dark below us, when she looked at me across the quiet hall, this woman who had survived a lifetime by never letting anything close on her, and reached out herself first, and closed her scarred hand over mine. The iron told the world what she was, but that her hand, chosen in the quiet, when no one was watching and nothing made her, that told me what we were. And of all the things 400 years of that dead iron ever woke, it is the only one I would not trade the whole of the north to keep.